What happens when a rising conservative star confronts one of daytime TV's most outspoken liberals? Sparks fly. But no one anticipated this outcome. On a recent episode of The View, Karoline Leavitt, a young conservative firebrand, took the hot seat in front of one of the toughest daytime talk show panels in America. But instead of being steamrolled, she did the unthinkable. She left Behar speechless with a single sharp retort. This is the story of how Karoline turned the tables and left millions talking. A little debate, a few laughs, some applause, a couple of eye rolls, and the usual swirl of strong opinions from daytime television's most famously liberal panel. That's the formula. It rarely changes. And that's exactly why the tension was so thick backstage that morning. Karoline Leavitt was the guest. Not a celebrity plugging a book or a musician dropping an album. No. This was different. Karoline, at just 20-something years old, had already built a name for herself. Not by chasing headlines, but by challenging them. Former Trump White House staffer, the youngest female press secretary in U.S. history, and now a fast-rising force in Gen Z politics who wasn't afraid to walk straight into the heat, smart, sharp, unshakable. That's how her supporters described her. And on this morning, she was fully aware of where she was headed. The set of The View. For some, it's a platform. For others, it's a gauntlet. With names like Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Hostin, Ana Navarro, and Joy Behar seated across the table, a conservative guest doesn't usually come to win. They come to survive. But Karoline? She came for neither. She came to stand firm. In the dressing room, she adjusted her navy blue blazer, glanced in the mirror, and reviewed her talking points one last time. Not because she was nervous, but because she was ready. She knew the topics: Gen Z and politics, free speech on college campuses, election integrity, the type of subjects that almost guaranteed fireworks in that studio. But she also knew something else. This wasn't just about talking policy. It was about posture, presence, poise. Producers gave the 5-minute warning. Staffers buzzed past her in a flurry of clipboards and lanyards. A makeup artist did a final touch-up as a stagehand whispered, "They're already warmed up." "The audience is loud today," she nodded. Out on set, the panel sat at their curved table, sipping coffee, smiling to the cameras. Whoopi was leaning back, scanning her cards. Sunny tapped her iPad. Joy Behar, eyes twinkling with that trademark mix of wit and mischief, glanced at the guest chair, then smirked. She knew this wasn't going to be a soft segment. She was ready for a match, but she wasn't expecting the kind of guest who could give one. The announcer's voice rang through the studio. "Please welcome Karoline Leavitt." The applause rose. The music faded, and Karoline stepped into the eye. Spotlight. She walked with purpose, but not arrogance. Confident, not cocky. Her heels clicked on the polished floor as she crossed to her seat, smiling graciously to the audience, even giving a brief wave to a few fans cheering from the back rows. She knew some in the crowd had already made up their minds about her, before she even spoke. But that didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. She sat down, microphone on. Camera 1 locked in. Showtime. The energy in the studio changed the moment she opened her mouth. From the first sentence, it was clear she wasn't here to perform. She was here to engage. She thanked the panel for having her, then launched straight into the issues, speaking on how her generation is tired of being told what to think, how young Americans are hungry for real dialogue, not sound bites. The words were smooth, but not rehearsed. Passionate, but not aggressive. She had the tone of someone who'd been underestimated and had learned to use that underestimation as fuel. And across the table, the panel listened. At first. Joy Behar's brow lifted. Sunny tapped her pen. Whoopi leaned in, tilting her head slightly, the way she does when she's both curious and skeptical. The game had begun, but the players weren't quite sure. how to handle this guest yet. Karoline continued. She spoke about censorship on college campuses, about students being shouted down for asking questions, about how too many young people feel pressured into silence because their opinions don't fit the narrative. It wasn't inflammatory. It was sincere. And for a brief moment, even the audience quieted to listen, but beneath that calm surface, the current was swirling. Viewers watching at home were already tweeting. Clips were being screen recorded in real time. Pundits on both sides were preparing hot takes before the segment even ended. Because this wasn't just a guest segment. This was a clash of ideologies, wrapped in makeup and morning coffee. Backstage, a producer whispered to another, "This is going to be big. She's good." And they were right, because while Karoline was calm, composed, and respectful, she wasn't backing down. And that meant the temperature in the studio was only going to rise. As she wrapped up her opening statement, citing the First Amendment and calling for more open conversations, the hosts looked at each other, Joy Behar especially, and that's when it began. But we'll get to that in the next chapter. Karoline Leavitt, poised and thoughtful, spoke clearly about her core values: freedom of speech, personal responsibility, limited government, and the power of critical thinking. Her words were measured, but firm. The kind of message that didn't need volume to carry weight. She talked about how young Americans feel disillusioned, told what to say, how to feel, and when to be outraged. She made her case for why open dialogue, even uncomfortable dialogue, is the cornerstone of democracy. And for a moment, the conversation hovered in that rare territory. Respectful disagreement. But you could feel it simmering just below the surface. A little eye roll here. A tight-lipped smile there. The kind of subtle cues that let you know the gloves were coming off soon. Then came the moment. Karoline had just begun explaining why she believes the Constitution is not a living document, but a timeless framework designed to protect individual rights against government overreach. Her tone was passionate but controlled. She wasn't lecturing, she was laying out a worldview. That's when Joy Behar, the queen of daytime sass, pounced. Interrupting mid-sentence, Joy tilted her head, gave a condescending smile, and said, loud enough for the audience to hear every syllable, "Honey, it's cute that you've memorized some talking points, but how much do you actually understand about the real world?" The words hit like a slap. The audience reacted immediately. There were chuckles, a few gasps. Some clapped, not because they agreed necessarily, but because Joy had delivered a line, a punchy, meme-ready moment, the kind of thing that gets clipped, captioned, and posted before the commercial break even hits. Whoopi Goldberg smirked. Sunny Hostin raised an eyebrow. Ana Navarro gave a tight nod. The panel, consciously or not, had just closed ranks. Karoline looked across the table. She didn't speak right away. She didn't rush to defend herself or raise her voice. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She sat still, completely unfazed. Joy Behar, still riding the wave of her own comment, continued. "You're young. You're smart, I'll give you that. But you talk like someone who's read a few op-eds and now thinks she's got Washington figured out." The tension in the room spiked. Even members of the production crew watching from offstage shifted, uncomfortably. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was a challenge to Karoline's legitimacy, her intelligence, her experience. But here's where everything shifted. Most guests, especially younger ones, might have fumbled. In that moment, maybe they would have cracked a nervous smile, tried to redirect, or even gotten flustered and thrown off their rhythm. Not Karoline. She didn't fidget, she didn't flinch, she didn't even blink. Instead, she sat up straighter. You could almost see the air shift around her. The smile she offered back to Joy was polite, but unyielding. Her eyes, calm and focused, didn't leave the older host's face. It was the silence that spoke volumes. 5 seconds passed, long enough for everyone in the room to feel it. And it wasn't dead air. It was anticipation. Karoline was about to respond. But before we get to that response, it's important to understand what was really happening in that moment. This wasn't just an exchange of opinions, it was symbolic. A generational clash, a political standoff. One woman, raised on the traditions of 60s progressivism, sitting across from a Gen Z conservative, rewriting the rules of the modern debate stage, and there it was, the moment millions would soon be replaying across social media. Karoline leaned slightly forward, no mic adjustment, no performative pause, just clarity, like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. We'll get to her response in the next section. But here's what made that second so pivotal. She had been challenged, not on policy, not on facts, but on who she was, her age, her gender, her experience. And instead of backing down, she held the line. Calm, composed, completely in control. That's when people watching at home, even some who didn't agree with her, started paying closer attention. Because Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a guest on The View anymore. She was the story. Joy Behar wasn't finished. If her first jab had been a warning shot, her next words were a full-on barrage. You could see it in her body language. The casual lean into the table, the raised eyebrow, the slight shake of the head as if to say, "Bless your heart, but..." It was the kind of moment she'd perfected after decades on air. Cutting, clever, and just sharp enough to sting. "You're too young to get it," she said, waving her hand dismissively in Karoline's direction. "You talk like someone who's read a few headlines and now thinks she's a policy expert." The laughter returned, stronger this time. It rolled through the audience like a wave. Some genuine, some forced, but unmistakably real. It was the kind of laughter that reinforces the power dynamic, that says, "You don't belong here." Even the panel leaned into it. Sunny Hostin gave a tight smile. Whoopi looked off camera and chuckled under her breath. Ana Navarro scribbled something down, possibly prepping her next line. And somewhere in the background, a camera operator reportedly muttered, "Wow," under his breath. Not at what was said, but at what was unfolding. Karoline Leavitt was under fire, live, in front of millions. Now, let's be honest. Many guests would have cracked at this point. It's easy to speak confidently in an echo chamber or from behind a podium. But when you're sitting across from seasoned TV hosts who know how to spin a phrase and command a crowd, it's a whole different kind of pressure. The producers cut to a close-up of Karoline's face. No sign of panic, no hesitation. Just calm, focused silence. And make no mistake, that silence was deafening. The panel had expected her to squirm, maybe to defend her resume, or even laugh it off. They expected the usual guest playbook, retreat, reframe, recover, but Karoline didn't. "Follow that script," she didn't interrupt. She didn't get flustered. She didn't even blink, she just listened. And that's what rattled the room more than anything. Because silence, true silence, on a show built on talking over each other, that's power, that's control. But the tension didn't stop there. Joy leaned in again, doubling down for a third time, a move that many viewers later called uncomfortably personal. "You're what, 25? 26? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I've got shoes older than you, and I've lived through a few presidents. Trust me, you've still got a lot to learn." More laughter. But this time, it was different. A little more awkward, a little more hesitant. Even some viewers watching at home later said the tone began to feel off. Because here's what everyone started to sense. This wasn't just political disagreement. This was personal. A generational clash dressed up as debate. A veteran host using her years in media as a weapon and aiming it squarely at a guest young enough to be her granddaughter. And yet, Karoline didn't retreat. She didn't fire back with anger. She didn't try to outsnark Joy Behar, a nearly impossible feat on her own stage. Instead, she waited. A producer later revealed that during that moment, the control room fell silent too. Nobody wanted to cut to commercial. Nobody wanted to talk over what was unfolding, because Karoline wasn't losing her footing. She was finding her moment. You could see her shift slightly in her chair, not a flinch, a reset. Her hands remained still. Her expression didn't change. But her posture said everything. You've had your say. Now it's my turn. In that quiet moment between Joy's jab and Karoline's response, the entire tone of the show began to shift. Some audience members stopped laughing. A few even looked uncertain. You could feel it. The line between entertainment and embarrassment had been crossed, and not by Karoline. And just like that, the stage was set. For the next 10 seconds, Karoline Leavitt would go from underestimated guest to viral sensation. But before we get to the line that launched 1,000 tweets, here's why that moment mattered. It wasn't about age. It was about assumption. Joy assumed Karoline didn't belong, based on nothing more than her youth and political background. It wasn't about experience. It was about dismissal. And viewers saw it. It wasn't about political sides. It was about respect. Something that, by this point in the show, many felt Karoline hadn't been given. Millions of young viewers, especially Gen Z and millennial conservatives, were watching. Many had seen people like Karoline, smart, conservative, and young, get steamrolled on national platforms before. But this time, the story was about to take a different turn. Because the next thing out of Karoline Leavitt's mouth wouldn't just defend her experience, it would flip the entire room. Karoline took a breath. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't for show. It was just a simple, measured breath, the kind someone takes when they've made a decision to stop playing defense and start playing offense. All eyes were on her. The audience was quiet now, sensing something different was about to happen. The panel, especially Joy, seemed caught off guard by the lack of retaliation. It was like watching someone in a boxing ring who'd taken a few hits and was now calmly stepping forward, gloves still up, eyes laser-focused. Then Karoline spoke. No yelling. No insult, no rambling monologue, just one sentence, delivered with razor-sharp clarity and zero hesitation. Joy, she said calmly, if age is wisdom, then why do you still think the government knows what's best for us? Boom, it didn't land like a punch. It landed like a lightning bolt, sudden, silent, and electrifying. For a full second, nobody reacted. Then another second passed, then another. 5 full seconds of silence. That's an eternity on live television, especially on a show known for its nonstop chatter. But in that silence, everything changed. Joy Behar didn't blink. She didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. Her jaw dropped, just slightly, and her eyes went wide. The famous smirk she often wore during contentious moments? Gone. She had no comeback, and it was stunning. Even Sunny Hostin, usually quick to jump in and steer the conversation, sat back with a surprised look. Whoopi looked down at her notepad. Ana Navarro actually whispered something under her breath, caught only by sharp-eared viewers replaying the moment online. It was a rare, almost surreal sight. The entire panel, momentarily speechless, but, more importantly, the audience felt it. That sentence had cut through every talking point, every joke, every attempt to belittle. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. It exposed a hypocrisy, not with anger, but with logic. It was a moment of intellectual judo, flipping the weight of Joy's own argument back onto her. Karoline hadn't shouted. She hadn't lashed out. She didn't need to, because sometimes the sharpest blade is the quietest voice with the clearest point. Then came the reaction. First, a gasp. One or two audience members audibly sucked in air. A few others murmured. The camera panned across the crowd, capturing wide eyes and stunned expressions. Then came the applause. At first, it was a few people, hesitant, maybe testing the waters. But then it grew. Claps turned into cheers. People nodded. Some even stood up. And it wasn't just noise. It was earned. Not for a zinger, not for a takedown, but for something deeper. The recognition of strength, clarity, and authenticity in the face of pressure. Backstage, producers were caught, scrambling. The control room lit up with surprise. Social media, which had been watching the broadcast live, exploded. Within minutes, clips of the moment were flooding X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram Reels. One post read, "Karoline Leavitt just dropped a truth bomb so clean, even Joy Behar couldn't spin it." Another said, "That silence from the panel after Karoline's line? That's the sound of a paradigm shifting." Even some people who didn't politically align with Karoline admitted the power of that moment. They weren't necessarily changing parties, but they were listening. And that's not nothing. Political commentators began chiming in within the hour. Some called it one of the boldest moments on The View in years. Others said it might go down as a defining TV moment for young conservatives. But beyond the headlines, beyond the applause, beyond the virality, something more important happened. Karoline Leavitt had reset the room. She had turned a corner that many thought impossible. She had proven, in real time, under real pressure, that calm conviction beats condescension. And she didn't just defend her beliefs, she elevated them. She showed that wisdom isn't owned by one generation, that clarity doesn't need credentials, and that, yes, a young woman with courage and principle can stand toe-to-toe with media veterans and not just hold her own, but win the room. The moment had ripple effects. That clip was played on cable news, analyzed by podcasters, remixed into TikToks, and shared in group chats across the country. People were texting it to their parents. Teachers were showing it in high school debate clubs. It became more than a viral moment. It became a marker, a moment that said, "You don't have to shout to be heard, you just have to speak truth." And for every young person watching, especially those who've been told they're too inexperienced, too naive, or too idealistic, that one sentence from Karoline Leavitt carried a bigger message. Don't wait for permission to speak up. Just be ready when the moment comes. The show had ended. The cameras were off. The lights dimmed. But the moment? The moment was just beginning to burn its way across the internet. Karoline Leavitt walked off that set without raising her voice, without a single insult, and without backing down. And as soon as she stepped off stage, she knew what to do next. She pulled out her phone and posted the now iconic clip, the one sentence that flipped the entire energy of the room, with a caption that summed up everything. She stood for, "Never let them tell you you're too young to speak truth." And just like that, the internet lit up. Not in hours, not in days, in minutes. It was one of those rare cultural moments where a message cuts across all the usual lines. People weren't just liking the post, they were sharing it, retweeting it, commenting things like, "I may not agree with her politics, but she just owned that moment. This is why we need more young voices in the conversation. Class, poise, brilliance, that's how it's done." From Instagram stories to YouTube shorts, from TikTok edits to political roundtables, Karoline's moment had gone everywhere. Conservative outlets hailed her as the new face of Gen Z politics. Independent media praised her calm resolve. Even a few liberal commentators, cautiously but honestly, admitted that the moment was a masterclass in rhetorical poise. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about politics. It was about principle. It was about a young woman walking into a space where she was clearly outnumbered, ideologically and numerically, and still holding her ground. It was about saying, "I'm not here to please you. I'm here to tell the truth as I see it. No shouting, no tantrum, no dramatic exits, just clarity, courage, conviction. And for viewers watching across the country, especially young people, it was more than inspirational. It was a roadmap. Because here's the truth no one talks about. Too often, we're told we need to wait our turn, that we're too young or too inexperienced to speak up, that we haven't lived long enough to understand the world. But Karoline shattered that idea, not by talking over others, but by outthinking them. She showed that you don't need to be older, richer, or more famous to make your voice count. You just need to be prepared. You need to know who you are, what you believe, and why it matters. And you need to be willing to speak up, especially when it's not easy. That's what made her moment with Joy Behar resonate so deeply. It wasn't just about delivering a gotcha line. It was about defying expectations, calmly, clearly, and unapologetically. And that's why it struck such a chord. The DMs rolled in. Young women across the country messaged her saying they felt empowered. College students wrote about how they'd always been afraid to speak out in class, but now they wouldn't be. High schoolers posted TikToks sharing their own moments of standing firm. Suddenly, this wasn't just a moment. It was a movement. And let's not forget, Karoline wasn't backed by a panel of allies. She wasn't playing to a friendly crowd. She was alone in that room, but she never once looked outnumbered. Because when you speak the truth with grace, you don't need backup. So now, the question becomes, what's next? Who should Karoline take on next? Should she go one-on-one with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Take the debate to California and face off with Governor Gavin Newsom? Maybe even go toe-to-toe with Hillary Clinton herself? You tell us. Drop your dream matchup in the comments. We're reading them all, because moments like this are rare, but they don't have to be. Not if more young leaders like Karoline step up. Not if more viewers demand real conversations over rehearsed talking points. And not if we remember that age doesn't define your impact. Integrity does. So if you found this moment as powerful as we did, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm this story matters. Subscribe to the channel for more bold voices and defining moments. Tap that bell so you never miss the moment truth goes viral. Thank you for watching. And remember this. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be old to be wise. You just have to be brave enough to speak one sentence that matters. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything.